Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, November 30th, 2016. We're ready to go with yet another exciting episode of Can You Believe Donald Trump is Going to Be Your President? What the game show everybody loves to play. Here's what's got me concerned this morning. I mean, tweeting up to the moment before the microphones come on. I'm watching Donald Trump, as usual, pardon me, the president-elect, I mean, like any president-elect, there's a Freudian slip for you, president-collect. Now I've got a term for him. Thank you. Trademarked, David Waldman, 2016. I better get it done before Donald Trump comes in and takes that trademark away from me. As usual, all presidents-elect, of course, raise money for their own inaugural celebrations. It's kind of a workaround of, almost all of the presidency really is kind of a workaround of bribery laws in a way. Even an upstanding and honest citizen, like name your favorite president, to this point, has engaged in this sort of thing. Essentially, you're for the purposes of the inauguration. For instance, you're putting on a big giant party in honor of yourself, and you're beginning your first day of 4 to 8 years, and probably the rest of your lifetime too, but of 8 years of living in official splendor, and basically, living certainly the lifestyles of the rich and famous. Of course, added on top of it is the responsibility of leadership of the free world, and it kind of sucks. It's not a great deal, and if you could be rich versus being rich in the president, in terms of enjoying your life, stick with being rich would be my advice, but okay, your mileage may vary. Anyway, so the presidents, including President Obama, would have raised millions of dollars. Though I believe the Obama transition and inaugural committee tried to, how do we say, separate himself. And of course, I think they actually banned for whatever mileage you might get out of this, banning corporate contributions to the inaugural committee. In other words, treating the inaugural committee much like a campaign committee, which in itself doesn't really clean up money in politics. But anyway, so you got a decent, honest guy like Barack Obama, and some of you may differ with that characterization, but for the sake of argument, coming into office, and big donors are no doubt attaching their names to big checks going to his inaugural committee designed to give him a gigantic party just the way he wants it, which is kind of like, it's not dollars in the pocket, obviously. It's a different thing than stuffing a wad of cash in somebody's pocket and saying, this is what I want out of the presidency. But it's still, if viewed suspiciously, a big giant contribution to an organization which exists to put on a big party for me, which I will enjoy. Okay, it's a little ephemeral, so we don't tend to look at it as bribery outright. We all get to go to the party, after all, right? So we look the other way on it, and there's enough separation between the guy's pockets and the money that we don't worry too much about it. Donald Trump, of course, is a different type of animal altogether. And he's, I'm sure, inventing new ways, or at least thinking of new ways. I don't know whether he's working them out, but it just occurred to me as I'm watching this thing. First of all, the Trump inaugural committee apparently has foregone the rule banning corporate donations to the inauguration. And that's not a step in the right direction, but it might not be the worst thing in the world. Anyway, it's not a good one. I don't recommend it. But, okay, so corporations are giving money. So big deal. They used to give money in ways that were disguised to make it look like individuals were giving the money instead. And, so now instead of CEOs giving enormous checks to try and buy influence for their corporations and then getting some kind of reimbursement about it later on, or having their salaries boosted for some unknown reason in the amount of money that they might have given away, something like that, some kind of crazy deal like that. Instead, now the corporation can just give the money directly. It's not better. It is worse, but it's not nuclear holocaust, which we're facing, by the way. Anyway, so now you can do this directly. And now I see that the Trump Inaugural Committee is basically circulating a menu of, and it's not that much different from other previous inaugurations in that there's a package. If you donate X, you're going to get all sorts of exclusive benefits and a dinner where the president is wandering around, and it may intimate, it may not be. You may have a chance to whisper in his ear, you might not, but it's kind of a standard thing. Although this time, I don't know, it seems like the package is, well, one, it's attached to $1 million price tag, which I think is a little audacious, but maybe not. I haven't really tracked how much money people give to inaugural committees in the past. But with Trump being a different animal, if you were following my tweets this morning, then you know where I'm going with this. If not, good for you. You were enjoying your morning. Maybe you're listening to this by podcast. You were doing something else with your life. I'm going to rob you of those couple minutes of your life now. But do we know exactly how things are structured? That we won't, obviously. We don't know anything about how Donald Trump structures his finances. At least not much about it, not about his personal finances, because, of course, he hasn't released his taxes and likely never will. But he's used to operating in a celebrity world. My question here is, are we going to see any of these $1 million plus contributions, perhaps corporate contributions, that come into the inaugural committee, which is, after all, not an actual governmental organization, and not quite a campaign organization either, but I think it's treated like a campaign organization for regulatory purposes. But I'm wondering whether Donald Trump is asking about, or has already structured for himself, something like a holdover from his celebrity life. He is, of course, the star of the show known as the inauguration, and dollars are coming into the Republican committee, his campaign committee, other places, other people's campaign committees, because he's going to be at this event. Usually what that means in private life for Donald Trump, it's meant an enormous appearance fee, or in his business life, a management fee. I want everything to be covered in gold at my inauguration. Okay, sir, we'll go ahead and do that. Good. And that's a $1 million management fee to me for giving you the instruction to go cover everything in gold. I wouldn't be terribly surprised if there was a DJT Inauguration LLC somewhere formed already, which we may or may not actually know about. That would be a public record, but no one has looked for it. That's getting a slice of these corporate contributions for the purpose of paying Donald Trump for his time as a celebrity for showing up at the inauguration parties and making them a success. Especially if he's being invited to, as most presidents-elect and newly inaugurated presidents are, to other inaugural balls around the city being put on by state Republican parties. He'll want a cut of what they're collecting based on the promise of him showing up at one of these things. That's kind of the way the celebrity world operates, and I don't see anything so far that indicates that Donald Trump is willing to conduct himself differently in the presidency or as president-elect than he did before. Witness all of what we're watching about his refusal to separate himself from his business while he collects revenues from people looking to get inroads and find a receptive audience with the incoming president by buying rooms in his D.C. hotel, which may not stay his D.C. hotel, by the way. Interestingly enough, we've got a story we can cover on that. But let's turn to Greg Dworkin, who's been waiting patiently for a few minutes, calling in from Connecticut. Good morning, Greg. How are things?
Good morning.
There?
Having my tea and sipping it while you talk. I know that you get to do that sometimes and have your coffee. So
once in a while. So I thought I'd return the favor. That'll be $1 million.
It's great. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for the $1 million. That was my fee for letting you drink the tea.
Your name.
I should. I liked the Freudian slip I'm turning into to the phrase that pays for today, calling Donald Trump the president-elect.
I think that's perfect.
I think that'll work. That's the guy I'm talking about.
But I really, there are all these cartoons in the run-up to the election, but I really expect Trump's name to be in gold leaf, not real gold.
Yes, well, right. That's that leaves less than money.
If Ron Paul had won, it would be real gold. But with
that's true.
With Trump, it would be just gold leaf, and he'll have that on top of the White House, and it'll be the Trump House.
Yeah, I mean they may.
I can't wait. It's just every day is another day.
Ivanka will design the letters.
A combination of humiliation, like Mitt Romney sucking up to Donald Trump to get to be Secretary of State. Except what'll happen is the humiliation will be complete because Trump will give the job to somebody else. And watching people, even in my own profession, the American Medical Association, endorsing Tom Price as the greatest thing since sliced bread, and finally we have somebody who's relevant and interested in our needs here at the American Medical Association, which, by the way, represents about, 17% of docs, practicing doctors, and is a lobbying group. Please do not ever mistake the American Medical Association for a patient advocacy group.
Well, yeah, that would be unwise.
Far from it. It's a lobby group, and naturally, they would endorse somebody like Price. Igor Bolsky 5 years ago wrote why. He had a piece in Think Progress entitled 77% of doctors say AMA does not represent their views, and talks about the fact that the AMA theoretically represents all physicians. The paying membership comprises somewhere between 15 to 18% of docs. Consequently, member dues accounted for a small percentage of AMA revenue. Where do its funds come from? Billing codes, CMS payment negotiations, other non-membership related operations. So basically, they really want to stay on a good side of their payment masters over at Center for Medicaid Services, Medicare and Medicaid Services, which is CMS. And so they're going to suck up and try to do their best to please their masters. This is a health affairs blog piece I have from September of 2015, written by Michael Millinson, Medicare Fair Pay in the AMA, The Forgotten History, and talks about what it was like pre-1965 before there was socialized medicine, which always must, by, a congressional law, be put in scare quotes.
Yeah.
Right? The most common entrepreneurial excesses were fee splitting, where a specialist paid a kickback in the referring doctor. That's illegal now. And ghost surgery, where a surgeon secretly paid a colleague to operate on an anesthetized patient. The first surgeon paid the ghost a small part of the total fee, pocketed the difference. That way they could be out on the golf course. Even worse was rampant surgical overuse. I added the golf course parts, where common excesses included appendectomies for stomach aches and hysterectomies on young women with nothing more than back pain, and I would add, and a history of being hysterical. So we'll fix it.
Yeah, which is not really okay. All right, I get you.
Right? In the old days, what would happen is that it's all fee-for-service, and the market for medical care was unique, this piece says, because outsiders couldn't judge the quantity or quality of service provided. Instead, the behavior expected of sellers of medical care is different from that of businessmen in general. The ethically understood restriction on the activity of a physician are much more severe than those on, say, a barber, which is cute because that's where surgeons originally came from.
Yeah.
Or plumber. That's why the barber pole has that red and white stripe, it's the blood from the battlefield. Medicare changed a lot of this, but it was the AMA who really was in the forefront of resisting and opposing socialized medicine because they wanted to be able to charge whatever they could get.
What an idea.
So if you have a guy like Tom Price who wants to come in and actually advocates for some of these practices that we have long ago gotten rid of, it's really quite distressing. And that's on the Medicare side. He would like physicians to be able to bill patients, and if Medicare doesn't cover it, then the doc gets to charge the patient the difference.
Oh, well.
And that's fine, if it's an office visit. But if you're a surgeon, orthopedic surgeon like Dr. Price, well, that could be tens of thousands of dollars.
Ah.
From a guy who promised not to touch your Medicare.
What a nice fellow.
Yeah. Now, Kaiser Health Network has this piece on what it might mean for Medicaid and points out from the piece a number of Republican governors have supported the idea of block grants because the program would generally relieve states from rules governing who and what to cover in Medicaid in exchange for accepting limited funding. But advocates for the poor say it would lead to fewer people getting fewer services. Because the federal contribution proposed by Paul Ryan is specifically set to increase more slowly than predicted inflation in healthcare, states could either contribute much more to the Medicaid programs or use that flexibility to make deep cuts to the program. A 2012 estimate from the Urban Institute said that year's proposal could result in 17 million people losing coverage, and payments to healthcare providers could be cut by nearly a third. So the trouble with block grants is that you give the money to the states, and then the states could do whatever they want. It's kind of like the tobacco settlement, right? Was that really used for smoking cessation and other health needs? No. They used it to general revenue balance their budget so they didn't have to raise taxes, then ran out of money, then they were stuck.
Dang.
That's what happens.
Yes. That's true.
So Thomas Miller of the Conservative American Enterprise Institute, AEI, says more recent proposals have gotten less draconian. It's gotten a little better because as opposed to a big block grant, it's gone to the per capita allotment. That would be based on the number of people enrolled in the program. And that would be better than simply giving states a single pot of money. With a per capita cap, the Fed's contribution would rise as more people are added to the program, but the cuts would still be deep because you're achieving similar savings by slashing spending per beneficiary. And then in Medicare, there's this concept called premium support. You give enrollees a set amount of money to spend on the health plan of their choice, and then that way you could get out of Medicare and go buy another insurance plan if you wish. But again, the problem with that is that the people who are on Medicare tend to be older and sicker, and they quickly blow through whatever coverage is there if the coverage isn't complete. So essentially, all of the Republican and conservative proposals, which in many ways in several iterations Price has endorsed, all have to do with making insurance cheaper so that it benefits, 18 to 45-year-olds who don't need as much medical care. So they basically bring back the old junk plans that didn't really cover anything, but they were a lot cheaper. That will please people who don't really need it because that way you don't have to watch your premiums skyrocket, except they used to anyway before the Affordable Care Act. But they don't cover a lot of stuff. And the people who would be most harmed are the people who actually need medical insurance.
Yes, at least immediately. It catches up with you in the end.
Well, when you're 65, it's going to be almost immediately.
Yes. I mean, for people who think they don't need much in the way of coverage and it's okay to pay a
you don't need it until you need it, and then you find out you're stuck.
Oops.
Too bad for you.
And the money comes out on the back end instead. Now I can't afford this operation, and I'm bankrupted by this instead of squeezed by premiums earlier.
Uwe Reinhardt, medical economist, has a nice piece in Vox. The fundamental questions in the U.S. as in other countries are what kind of treatments from the very sick members of society should receive, especially end-of-life treatments, and how those treatments should be financed given that the treatments can quickly exhaust the budgets of the afflicted. In very poor developing countries, the answer to this question may well have to be to leave the sick people to their own fate. That approach is unacceptable in the more developed world where sick individuals usually do not receive treatments even if they can't pay for them. That leaves three alternative outside sources of financing. Public subsidies, cross-subsidies baked into health insurance premiums, forcing healthier individuals to subsidize through premiums they pay the healthcare of chronically sicker members in the same insurance risk pool, or cross-subsidies baked into the price charged paying patients by doctors, hospitals, and other providers of healthcare, which forces paying patients to cover the provider's so-called uncompensated care. Paying patients include both insured patients and self-paying patients. And that's the way it's been traditionally done. Hospitals, for example, would charge a little bit more because they know they're going to get a lot of indigent, and that's how you cover the costs. And as long as people step back and look at this as a societal decision, it's okay. The problem gets to be when everybody looks at insurance as like it's only for me.
Yeah.
And everybody else doesn't count. Just as a quick example, I'm male. Why should I subsidize pregnancy? Doesn't affect me.
Right.
I've already had my kids. And besides, I as a male, I don't need all of this, like women's stuff. Why do I have to pay for it? Why do I have to pay for pregnancy? If I'm healthy, why do I have to pay for that person at my company who's sick? When you're building it in,
it's all real,
to employer-based insurance,
yes,
you don't notice it. You don't care. But when you take it out into the individual market, all of a sudden, these things start to be issues. So part of the problem with just talking about costs is that you really have to have a fundamental foundational question about what it is you're trying to do here. And that's part of the reason why conservatives and liberals never really get it together to talk rationally about healthcare. To liberals, it really matters that there's 20 million people that are covered that weren't before, that the number of people who now don't have insurance is down below double digits. This is a huge success, and it really matters. At the conservatives, no, it doesn't. That's really not the issue. Healthcare isn't the right, and if they can't afford it, too bad for them. The real issue is how much does it cost individuals? And that's a completely different discussion than how many people should be covered. So Uwe Reinhardt gets to some of the basic fundamentals here in terms of what you're trying to do. And part of the problem is even his notion, his frame, how you pay for financing care that people want, has little or nothing to do with the incoming Trump administration and their purported preferences, reported preferences even, as to what they actually want. They don't accept that everybody needs health care. They don't accept that everybody should get it. And, there's an old joke that conservatives really got annoyed at, that the replacement to Obamacare for Republicans is just die sooner because it's cheaper.
Yeah.
But it turns out that's their actual program.
Oops.
What do you do with that? And that's part of this frustration and anger, really, that I think that's starting to develop on the liberal side. If you're going to mess with people's Medicare, the question then becomes, how does that spill over politically to the general public? And that is something that remains to be seen. It's just interesting that with price, a lot of this discussion is forced into the open perhaps sooner than they wanted. And we'll get to see what kind of public reaction there is to that. So if there's any silver lining, it's that. But it's an awful, awful choice.
That's not even – that's pretty poor silver. It's tarnished.
Yeah, it is. Chuck Schumer says that Trump's HHS pick is far out of the mainstream. And so far that there's been opposition developing from Democratic senators for the choice. Two interesting ones. Chris Murphy, my senator, of course, that would be expected. He's on the liberal side of the spectrum. But conservative Joe Donnelly from Indiana is also opposing him. And using the reason to oppose him is that he's trying to take away your Medicare. And if that's going to be a simple route, one of the problems with, everybody, even those who voted for her, said with the Clinton campaign is that there was no clear, simple message. Trump had a clear, simple message, and Clinton didn't. This is a very clear, simple message. Republicans are trying to take away your Medicare.
Yes.
It is possible that even Democrats can't blow that message.
Possible. There's still time.
It's early in the game, but that seems to be a fairly compelling message.
Okay. Well, it has been in the past, certainly.
So he says that putting Tom Price as the head of HHS is akin to asking the fox to guard the hen house.
Yes. And
it will be most interesting to see how this develops. Here's one from Stat News, which is the Boston Globe health vertical that spins off. What Trump's HHS secretary pick believes about medicine. It's a fairly in-depth piece about what should happen. Price says that he wants to put patients in charge. Even popular federal healthcare programs like Medicare have been detrimental in medicine because they limit choices for doctors and patients. There are restrictive reimbursement rates and federal rules on what treatments and procedures are covered by the program. Now, I have to tell you as a doc, pretty much everybody hates the rules and regulations, but that's not the point. There's a lot of things you hate that you still do because you think it's a good idea. I mean, I hate stopping at red lights, it's just annoying. I want to get somewhere, but there's a reason for it, and so you cooperate, because if everybody runs a red light, it's kind of a mess in the middle there. Price has said the new GOP-controlled government should overhaul Medicare in support of House Speaker Ryan's proposal to push the program toward a voucher system, which really is ending Medicare as we know it. It's not hyperbole to say that. Mm-hmm. And Price's own solutions includes price transparency and health savings accounts. Now, how retired people are supposed to put money into their health savings accounts that just were invented from nothing has never really been clarified. If you're not working, where are you supposed to get the money to do that? It's one thing to say that's an idea that everybody should start as of 18. And it's another thing to say that's something that everybody should start as of 67.
Yes.
So he says, and other economists say, HSAs give consumers more skin in the game by making them more directly responsible for paying for their health care, which would drive costs down. But let me tell you how it really works, because I work with patients with health savings accounts. What winds up happening is that it's very difficult for patients to prioritize what's important and what's not important. I have a limited number of dollars in my health savings account. Do I spend it on my statins to bring down my cholesterol, or do I spend it on my kid's asthma medicine? The asthma medicine is really expensive. I know my kid needs it. My doctor tells me my kid needs it, but it's really expensive. How about if I save some money by not giving them the daily controller asthma medicine, and I just buy the rescue medicines and then use it as needed? I'm taking a chance, but, hey, I'm saving money. And I'm making that choice because I'm in charge.
Yes, well, it's a lot
Doc
easier
looks
than
at
going
them
to
and
medical
says,
school.
let me take your head and hit it against the wall. Your kid keeps winding up in the hospital because you're not giving the controller medicines. Why are you doing that? Well, because I have to pay out of pocket. It's much easier for me to pay at a certain time of year than another time of year. It's one thing to, have the money at the beginning of the year and not have the money at the end of the year. Well, but the mission of the kid in the hospital just blew through your savings account. Now you have nothing, and you can't even afford the rescue medicine, let alone the prevention medicine.
Well,
and why did we decide to let you decide what you were going to do here? Now, that may sound incredibly East Coast elitist, but I'm telling you, that's how it works.
Yeah, no, I absolutely understand that, and I understand how that ends up being treated as elitist. But why should we let
some
doctors
people manage
decide?
it better than others?
Yeah,
just like with anything.
That's true, and I guess Republicans are they're okay with that,
and they're okay with the people who just don't manage it well. That's their problem.
Yeah, you should have managed it better.
We take the approach that why don't we just set the rules so that there's some minimum stuff here, so that everybody at least has your safety net not taken away from you if you screw up.
Yeah.
Safety nets. That's for liberals.
Well, be smarter next time and predict the future better.
Yeah. Be smarter next time before you die, okay? With your next life, be smarter.
Good luck with the next one.
Good luck with that. But in the meantime, think of the bright side. You died early and you saved us a whole bunch of money.
Yes, and yourself as well.
What you really should do is start smoking at age 9, and then, maybe you'll be dead by, 27 and save the country a tremendous amount of money.
Yeah. Well,
I think this is a great plan. Let me have a discussion with the tobacco companies. Maybe one of them can be head of HHS.
Well, that might not be a bad idea. That's
that's the way this government is working right now.
It's a health savings program right there.
Yeah, exactly. So again, there's these basic philosophical issues here about what's going on with this. And that's just the health side. You got the Goldman Sachs guy who's nominated for Treasury. You have the lawyer who used to work for Tom DeLay over as the White House counsel to watch things on ethics. You, of course, have Jeff Sessions and Betsy DeVos at their agencies. And who knows, maybe even Ben Carson at HUD.
Yes. And,
so, there's a whole lot to talk about. But it's Wednesday. John McCarter will be on a little bit later, I hope.
Not this Wednesday, unfortunately.
Not this Wednesday?
Yeah, she's on vacation, enjoying a brief break from all the craziness. So
all right. Well, I'll get aggravated over healthcare, so she doesn't have to. So she's on vacation, and she can come back and get this all fresh and everything.
Yep. All right. Well, we'll cover for her, and we certainly have a good place to start, thanks to what you've brought us. Yeah, this should be real interesting watching everybody manage things all by themselves. I wonder if I don't know whether they've done any more thinking about medical savings accounts than they did since they were first proposed and never went anywhere back in I don't know, maybe they were proposed before this, but last I heard of them as a serious proposal was in the Newt Gingrich speakership days. And I suspect that they haven't done any development work on them since. They hold that in their back pocket when people say, well, what are you going to replace Obamacare with? And they say medical savings accounts. And that's all there is to it. Now that they'll get a chance to propose it as legislation again, they might try and rework it. But, I recall when they were going to convert the Newt Gingrich idea of converting Medicare to health savings accounts was particularly bizarre in that it didn't end up saving us any money. But, of course, it was sold as a money-saving idea because medical savings account. What they were going to do was add up all the money that they were spending on Medicare beneficiaries, divide it by the number of Medicare beneficiaries, and then grant everyone that dollar amount as a medical savings account and say, go manage your money. And they said the great benefit of all this is people will manage the money better on their own than some bureaucrats and some unaccountable doctors, who have their own incentives to overcharge would do. And nobody to that point had asked the question, if you take the total expenditure of Medicaid divided by the number of Medicare, divided by the number of beneficiaries, and just give out that amount of money, doesn't that leave the government with net zero savings no matter what happens? And their answer was, what? What? I don't understand your question. You've just done the math of changing the amount of money you spent for reason A into the same amount of money spent for reason B. What's the savings? You're a communist, basically, was the answer. And why do you hate America? And then they never had to come back to medical savings accounts because it was flushed down the toilet in 1995, 96. And I wonder whether they've developed it any. So I think that's might still be the actual answer for what do you do for medical savings accounts for people who are retired. The answer is, how much did we used to spend on you? Fine. That's now called a medical savings account. The country saves money by giving you the same amount of money. And if you don't spend it all, we don't get it back. You get it, but the country saves money. And I guess the upshot is, if you don't take care of yourself for the brief moment that you're still alive after not taking care of yourself, you got a couple extra dollars. That's it. I think that's the whole solution. I certainly haven't heard anything different. So, I don't know. What do you make of it? Greg, are you still with us and have your mute button on? Or
No, we're listening.
Okay.
I think
Just
that
checking.
what America really needs is to simplify everything. And, the Reagan administration had a great way to do it. When they were looking at underserved areas, for example, in the island of Manhattan, in New York City,
Yes.
Instead of trying to do some wacky, complicated formula that you'd have to go to college in order to learn, it would be much better if you simply took the number of doctors and the number of people on the island and just do simple division. And according to that, there's plenty of docs to go around. The fact that the Upper East Side and East Harlem might have different constituencies and different health needs doesn't matter because, look at the numbers. It's all there. Why are you arguing with math? Here's a better way.
I knew how to do that math.
To pay people. Why don't you just give them a lump sum when they're born and let them manage it? Don't pay them a salary. Don't make them work for a living. Just give them the money, right? And if they mismanage it starting on day one, that's their problem. You only get a fixed amount. And if things change over time and things get more expensive, that's your problem. You got your lump sum. Well, why are you bothering me?
Yeah.
I mean, the whole idea that everything should be as simple as possible because by definition it's better doesn't necessarily hold. There's a reason why some things are complicated. Now, there's political aspects of this as well. This is a piece from The Atlantic that Ron Brownstein wrote about Donald Trump's fragile hold on America. And just the 2 paragraphs out of it. Trump dominated virtually every segment of blue-collar and non-urban white America and gives examples. Yet this still left Trump with no margin for error. He not only lost the popular vote, he also sealed his slim electoral college victory with wins of about 1 point or less in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, the three loosest bricks in the Democrats' blue wall. Trump's hold on these states could easily slip in a future election if he loses any ground among the constituencies who supported him, or if he further alienates the ones who opposed him. Now, how is doing all of this to Medicare supposed to help him hold ground amongst the constituencies who supported him, which happened to be people over 45. People under 45 voted for Clinton. People over 45 voted for Trump as a general rule. And seniors were one of his strongest groups. So I just don't understand politically how this works.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Then again, you're right. A lot of this doesn't matter. But, you know, it's the same head scratching we had when George Bush won. You know, when a Democrat wins by a small amount, you have to scratch your head and figure out how you get Republicans into the mix so that you make sure you're running the country for everybody. And when Republicans win, it's a mandate and you can do what you want. And if it was a 0.07% win, doesn't matter. We're just going to push through everything we want and to hell with you.
Well, I mean,
I've never totally understood that. It's a different mindset, but we're looking at it now.
Yes, and that is a different mindset, and maybe to some extent that's something we facilitate and witness certain portions of yesterday's show and every show, really. You put to Republicans the proposal that they need to pay attention to the rest of the country and bring them in, and they say, "What? No, we don't. Screw those people," and they're good with that. And put that same proposal to Democrats, and they say, yes, we do. I mean, we do need to take into account other things. There are certainly people we write off who are total crazy loons, but the idea that, millions of people ought to be dismissed with the wave of a hand, no, we don't do that. And yet, of course, so that A, that screws us up, and then B, somehow you still get written up as the elitist, as the guys who say, yeah, we absolutely do have to take everybody else into account. Those are the elitists, and the people who say, to hell with them, I won 51%. You can go screw yourselves.
And now I'm going to put lobbyists back into power, and I'm going to put Goldman Sachs people everywhere in government, and we represent the true blue-collar people. We're the people's voice.
It's working, and somehow we facilitate it, and, and it's because, again, I guess when you bring the analysis back to the two groups and say to the Republicans, you really did these things wrong. You really should have done this other thing. They say, no, you're wrong. You're out of here. You're an idiot. Bring it to Democrats, and they say, I should at least ponder the possibility. I mean, you never know. Nobody's perfect. What did I do? What could we do better? There's always room for improvement. And then so the press says, yeah, I guess we did it. And I don't know. I'm not sure. Again,
or even better,
sure how that's
the trouble with Democrats is that they're delusional and they refuse to accept reality. No, we'll look through carefully and decide what we made errors about and what we didn't make errors about. That's a fair statement. And on your side, shut up and get out of here.
Yeah. I mean, we're watching the same process
and
now.
What we need is more Fox News.
Democrats view the election, and I mean, there's all kinds of head-scratching, hand-wringing, internal warfare, what have you, whatever level you want to put it at in the Democratic Party. What do we need to do to change things? And in Republican circles, it's everybody needs to knuckle under to this guy. He's the man now.
We need more voter suppression because it worked. So shut up and move on and get with the program.
Yeah, either that or whatever. I mean, has there been anything out of the Republican side that's running the show at this point that even approaches resembling, hey, this was pretty narrow. What should we be doing to make sure that it's overwhelming next time? No. They just say more of the same.
So let me leave you with this one little piece here. It's behind a paywall, but this one part I did quote and give to you. It's Hemi Shalev writing in Haaretz. And he is a foreign correspondent who's lived quite a bit in the U.S., happens to be returning to Israel now. And he wrote a piece entitled I Love America, which is why I'm so worried about Trump.
And leaving.
He says, it wasn't the erroneous polls or media complacency or New York elitism or a disconnect from white voters in Wisconsin. Contrary to the spate of retroactive mea culpas, all of these factors were well documented and repeatedly considered in the days leading up to the November 8th ballot. Rather, It was a basic belief, which turned out to be an illusion, that America, my America, would never prefer a foul-mouthed misogynist buffoon who thrived on people's worst fears over a flawed candidate who was nonetheless measured and experienced like Hillary Clinton, who would be the first female president to boot. I suffered from cognitive dissonance, discounting warnings that this time around, my belief in America and in the wisdom of its ways may have been misplaced. I wish I could confidently say that in 4 years or even 8 years, the dialectics of history will correct whatever harm Trump will cause America, or pretend to believe that he will surprise us for the better. That's what many of us thought about Israel in recent years, but at this point in time, we seem to have been proven wrong. So I think that's pretty insightful.
Yes. And
that's INSIGHT. Not INCITEFUL, which in the Trump era, I think it's important to make that distinction, verbally or otherwise.
Pitchforks and torches insightful, and I don't know what, reading glasses insightful. I guess. Right. Two different kinds. Okay, well, and so back to Israel, eh?
So what do you do? Right. Well, we got this. There's still one more Senate race coming up.
Yes, and
there's one coming up in Louisiana.
In not talking more about it.
We should be talking more about it. It's in a week and a half.
For the guy.
And the interesting thing about that
yes.
is that the fellow who's running on the Democratic side, Foster Campbell, has, even before the selection of Tom Price, made protecting Medicare a central core of his campaign.
All right. Well,
so it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yes, it will be. Louisiana, weird place.
Sure, but work on it. I mean,
yes.
Do that.
Well,
Think about the upcoming 2018 elections. Painful though it might be, get past this one and start working on those. There's a lot of governor races up and state house races that are important. And the Democratic Party, if it's going to rebuild, really has to start rebuilding at state level and not worry only about the White House.
Yes.
So there's things people can do in a positive way, not just, sulk.
Yep. Okay. Well, that's very true. It just brought me back to, 2009.
Remember that? 2010 was such a disaster, and we're paying the price now.
Yes.
With people like Tom Price.
Yes. Well, we're always paying that price.
Yeah, exactly. So with that,
yes.
There's that to talk about, that to ponder.
There's lots.
Lots to ponder. Thanks so much. This is Greg Dworkin speaking with my friend David Waldman Kagro in the morning. We will get through this together. And we'll be back tomorrow, and we'll do it again.
Okay, very good. I'll take your word for it that we'll be here tomorrow.
Well, one of us will be, I think. Hopefully on the air.
So they say. Too. I'll still have the equipment anyway. Okay.
Well, might as well take care.
Thank you. You do the same. And, we'll be back tomorrow. So, yes, unfortunately we are without Joan McCarter today. And it was there was some question about whether or not she had told me last week. We can always go to the tape. Did she tell me last week that she was going to be on vacation this time? She probably did. Or she probably messaged me at some point. And, I would have forgotten it if she had told me Monday. By the time Wednesday rolled around, I'd have no idea that she had said it. But glad that this is a good time for a break for everybody. And I mean, imagine it doesn't take much to imagine it at home. The feeling of burning the candle at both ends through this election season, and then to come up with the disappointment at the end. I would say take 4 or 5 weeks vacation, except I'm not the boss, and I can't actually, just grant that to you. But Donald Trump can. Maybe he'll just automatically grant you all sorts of stuff like that. Anyway, let's see. Look, somebody objects to the idea of the notion of paying an appearance fee to Donald Trump from his inaugural committee, and it's true. This guy is Gavin Ivester, and he says, "Is there any reason to believe that there are, payments being made, or just a lack of proof they aren't, because that's Trump's game, not actual information?" And in a way, it is. But, of course, that's another way of getting around to the point of saying you really need to release your taxes and you really need to be transparent about the relationship between you, your children, the business, the government, etc. It's just a proxy for saying the same. We don't know what could be happening, and there are ways that we could know and that we routinely used to know and that we, as the governed of the United States, have a right to know, but we're not finding out. So is there a reason to believe that something illicit is going on? Yes. He's not making the same kind of disclosures that presidents have always made in the modern era, and the only real explanation for it is that he's hiding something quite like that. If not that, then that in a different form. So, there you have it. I mean, it's a thin answer, but it's not one we weren't supposed to be able to posit that question seriously. The rules have changed, and we may not like the way he uses that tool, but it's got to be fair game. It simply has to be. And it's a natural outgrowth of the refusal to release tax information and to be transparent in how you are separating yourself from the operations of government and quasi-government like the inaugural committee. Of course, I don't have the time to type that out for him at the moment. So, Gavin, download the podcast and listen to my answer, and I'll get back to you later if you don't. Okay. That's not really a great incentive to actually listen, is it? If you don't, I'll take care of you anyway. All right, so then I won't answer you. How about that? That'll teach you. You haven't heard me say that, but in theory, you will have felt that cosmically somehow. Let's guess. Okay, so there are a number of equally amazing stories today parked in Pocket, but of course all of it was upended by the morning tweets and morning thoughts on this end about the morning tweets. By the way, the other, I guess, late-breaking presidential, in name only, I guess, tweets from this morning were, this is interesting too. This is worth at least a mention. Trump's, were they morning tweets? I didn't even really take a look. I'll have to, let me scroll back and see. Yeah, here we go. This is the one I'm talking about. This was, so 6:20 or so Eastern time this morning. Trump tweets, ISIS is taking credit for the terrible stabbing attack at Ohio State University by a Somali refugee. And was he in the United States under refugee status? I'm not even 100% sure about that. Trump and his supporters have taken to calling anybody from countries that sound vaguely like there might be Muslims in them, that anybody who's here from that country is a refugee, as opposed to, just a regular, I got myself a green card and immigrated and whatnot. They're not all refugees. That's a very specific meaning. But anyway, maybe he is a refugee. I have no idea. But this is his morning tweet. And this is not unusual for Donald Trump. It's only that it's unusual for a president or president-elect. He just hasn't made that transition in his mind, and he may never make that transition in his mind. And he's got a team around him dedicated to making sure that he never has to make that transition in his mind, because that would make him uncomfortable, and it wouldn't allow Trump to be Trump. So they won based on Trump being Trump, and they want to be able to keep him Trump, even if it's illegal, dangerous, suicidal for the United States of America in general. They want to facilitate it because, they've got a hardened bunker. So what do they care? So he tweets this morning, ISIS is taking credit for the terrible stabbing attack at Ohio State University by a Somali refugee who should not have been in our country. And, that's standard. That's his line for all of this stuff. But it's not the kind of thing that a president or president-elect ought to be tweeting. There are 2 points, probably, at least, that need to be made about that. One, of course, is, I guess, I don't know, and I haven't seen the, whatever statement there might have been purportedly from ISIS, but, part of ISIS's game and part of any terrorist organization's game usually is claiming credit for attacks. Sometimes, even though they may have had nothing to do with it. And ISIS's game certainly is in part taking credit for anything that upends feelings of security in the United States. They'll claim credit for. And very rarely does anybody disavow that credit or come forward and say ISIS didn't have anything to do with that, because the perpetrator is often dead. And the perpetrator may or may not have had anything to do with ISIS. And even we're not even sure what it means to have anything to do with ISIS. If a person carries out an attack and only wishes that they were, I wish I was an ISIS fighter fighting it out in Syria or Iraq or wherever they might be dreaming about doing their fighting, but they have no real contacts with ISIS and never hope to have any, really. And in their frustration, they carry out a stupid attack like this, and then they have the opportunity. ISIS comes forward and says, yes, we're responsible. And they say, yes, I finally made it into the club. And so if they survived it, they would be able to, claim membership in the club for whatever that's worth. But they also very often just claim credit for anything if they know it will upset Americans or send the president-elect into a tailspin. So a couple of things about that. One, so ISIS is taking credit for the attack. Donald Trump, private citizen, tweeting something like this is closer to the line. When he certainly, as Republican candidate tweeting this, it changes. Private citizen, it's less so. President-elect, more so. You're giving that credit. As president-elect, surely that's the case. ISIS is taking credit. You're granting it. Don't do that. Don't tweet as an ISIS spokesperson. That's part of the role you've taken on and that you really need to get your head around. And then, of course, in addition to all of that, there is the question we were just discussing of, ISIS takes credit for it. Now, did they have any real reason to take credit for it, or were they just grabbing credit wherever they could? That should be familiar, of course, to Donald Trump, who actually plays that game quite often, claiming credit for things for which he is owed no credit. So you should be able to recognize that game. And you're going to want to, as president-elect and as president later on, you're going to want to minimize ISIS's impact, both real and imagined. And you're doing the opposite right now. And as I tweeted this morning, one, they're claiming credit and you're granting it. That's problematic. Two, at your security briefings, they would be teaching you the difference between ISIS says they deserve credit for this attack and ISIS did this attack. You should maybe think about going to some of those security briefings and learning the difference and learning why it's dangerous for the president-elect to grant the terrorists what you actually just literally gave the terrorists what they wanted. Whether they were behind this attack or not, no less an authority than the president-elect of the United States, which used to be a thing. Kids, if you're young and you don't realize it, it used to be a position of some respect. And there's still a lot of residual feeling about that in the American press corps and the international press corps. So when the president-elect says, yep, ISIS did it, then guess what? ISIS did it. ISIS is like cheering like they can't believe now. I can't believe we have our biggest ally is the President of the United States. He loves running around telling everybody that every stupid thing that happened is us. Amazing. Now, Rebecca Romans, I guess, has checked the news, unlike me, and says the Ohio State assailant did come into the country as a refugee. He has since been naturalized. And I guess the next question is, what was the timeline on that one? When was he naturalized? Are we talking about somebody who came into the country as a refugee well in advance of the existence of ISIS and was naturalized in 1993? I mean, a Somali refugee could be from days way back. I don't know. I don't know if that really matters, especially if we're still up in the air on the question of Did ISIS have anything to do with this? Now, I guess this is an interesting transition for the rest of us, too. In addition to Trump having to get his head around being a different person or wearing a different hat at the very least. The question of when Trump was always in the habit of tweeting that any attack that happened was terrorism well before it was determined one way or the other. And he was very proud of his record of what he called of being right. When in fact what it was is a record of guessing correctly. Sometimes he was correct, sometimes he was not. But this is the interesting thing. When private citizen Donald Trump would tweet, "Oh my God, this is a terrorist attack," his followers believed him, and the rest of us didn't. And the rest of us said instead, this is what we're talking about here is you guessing about what happened here. This is conjecture. You want it to be a terrorist attack for political reasons, perhaps. And so you're going to make it a terrorist attack in your mind for those reasons. Now, as president-elect, well, normally anyway, and as president, when you say those things, people will say it's official, and the person tweeting this is someone who actually has access to top secret intelligence reports about what this is and what happened and who did it. Of course, part of the problem is that he has access to that. He just doesn't use any of them. And so, one, we still can't be sure whether he knows anything. And two, I guess if he does know, then maybe he needs to be more careful with that information and treat it more carefully. But again, he has no intention of making that transition. Maybe it will just happen over time, but it certainly hasn't happened yet. It may be that over time it is impressed upon him, as it was apparently impressed upon him the other day, that this is actually a big job and will require a lot of attention. And this apparently surprised him. As I recall, this was according to a tweet that included a clip from a USA Today article, mostly focused on Newt Gingrich somehow. I'll call that one up and make sure I have it available for you. But apparently it's come to him as a surprise that, hey, this is a pretty big job after all. So it may be that one day this does dawn on him that he just needs to be more careful about how he tweets. But so far that hasn't happened. And we need to get used to the fact that we won't know what we're seeing from him. Is this the old private Donald Trump guessing that this is a terrorist attack? Is it the President of the United States saying, I have intelligence that indicates that it is in fact a terrorist attack? Is it the President of the United States still guessing because he hasn't bothered to listen to an intelligence briefing that will tell him? We won't know. We will never know. With other presidents, perhaps we never knew either. I mean, after all, George Bush occasionally refused the presidential daily briefings. We learned that much about him. But, I mean, wow. What are we supposed to make about this one? I mean, it used to be the default assumption was pretty safe, was that the president is taking in intelligence briefings and speaking with authority as a result. Now, we are no longer sure whether that's the case, and that's going to be very, very difficult to get used to. Well, I guess we better start work on it. Okay. Here, by the way, is the tweet that I had dug up. This one coming from Jesse Wegman. I love your supermarket, by the way. I don't think he has anything to do with it. Anyway, a member of the New York Times editorial board and covering the Supreme Court and legal affairs is where Jesse spends his time during the day, tweets this tidbit from a USA Today piece entitled Gingrich Calls Trump Tweet About Vote Fraud a Big Mistake. I wonder what he calls his tweet about the attack today. I don't know whether he would regard that as a mistake. Anyway, the piece that he highlights from this, President-elect Trump quoted as saying, "This is really a bigger job than I thought." I find that, of course, rather amazing, as you all do, because since kindergarten we've been taught that this is the biggest job in the world. And where you been, dude? But, of course, the answer is private school, apparently. And then, of course, in my own world, where everybody agrees with me no matter what I say. So I guess he hasn't learned a great deal in that space. All right. Well, we'll see what else is going on. Here's a reply to the tweet version of my admonishment to the President-elect not to tweet like an ISIS spokesperson. Marge Davis saying they're going to get bolder because the type of people emerging now are the type that would do ISIS's work for them. And I don't know whether she means people abroad or people in our own government. It's hard to tell. Well, anyhow, what a day. So let's see. Any other bits and pieces that we ought to raise? In the back of my mind, I think how we ought to spend or at least part of our second hour is in Joan's absence. I mentioned to you, of course, we've been holding a number of contributions from our correspondents around the country, and today would be an excellent day to catch up on some of them. But just noting for the record, so that we can all be up to date on such things, a few bits and pieces that I think you ought to be aware of, and at least one longer piece that I'd like to read at some point and parse, but perhaps we should all read it ahead of time and be ready to work on it in class tomorrow. Short hits, just to let everybody know that we're aware of it. Apparently there is now a deal in place that the Trump transition team is touting as a success in saving jobs at that storied carrier plant. Subject of a lot of discussion during the campaign. Donald Trump insisting, I will somehow step in and forbid Carrier from moving its jobs to Mexico and keeping them here in the United States. And some questions, split decision as to whether or not, in reality, things have worked out as he said. But I guess at this point it just becomes a spin game. Apparently, there's now a deal in place because the plant is in Indiana. So Mike Pence still has a hand in all of this. By the way, did Pence ever resign as governor of Indiana? I never did check back in on that one. So apparently the deal is that they are going to move, I guess they've got 3,000 jobs or so at the plant in Indiana. So now the deal is that they are going to move some portion of those 3,000. In fact, it looks like 2,000 of the 3,000 end up moving to Mexico, but 1,000 jobs remain in the United States thanks to a deal that will include some big tax breaks from the state of Indiana. And so there you go. And so the Trump team will say, see, we made a deal to keep 1,000 jobs in America, whereas everybody else says you paid Carrier millions of dollars to move 2,000 jobs to Mexico. The truth? Well, somewhere in the middle there or somewhere, I guess, but at least, people are spending their time analyzing this thing. The New York Times has a piece here, right? Trump to announce carrier plant will keep jobs in U.S. They will, but twice as many of them as they're keeping in the U.S. are in fact moving to Mexico, it appears. So not a huge win, I would say. Perhaps we can revisit that in the future and parse the details of it, but I do want to make room for other things. Other pieces worth noting in terms of reports from the states. Oh, yes, look at this. Rebecca says Pence has so far refused to step down. Will he stay governor of Indiana while vice president? That probably won't work out. But I guess at some point they'll toss him out on that. Bill making the observation. So it was a mini government bailout of AC. Is that Is that the full name of the carrier group, or what are we talking about here? Anyway, yeah, apparently so. Although, well, the carrier group, of course, makes air conditionings. Is that what you mean by AC? I'm not sure. Anyway, yeah, pretty much. Or just, I guess, basically a bribe for them to keep 1,000 jobs there and give them some basis for claiming credit for a win, like ISIS, I guess. They'll just claim credit for something, and I guess now he can just tweet success of it, and we all sit there and accept it. But I was going to give another dispatch from Maine, and Bill, you'll probably have something to say about this one too. For all the people who correctly showed us, indicated to us that if you were curious about what a Trump presidency might be like, of course now you'll have to find out. You could have looked to the governorship of Paul LePage in Maine, and there's a new example of that. And well, I'll share this one with you as a quick read because it is, of course, from our favorite blog, Daily Coast. Perhaps you've heard of it. Laura Clausen covers this one. Maine voters. You remember that Maine voters just recently approved the ranked choice voting? Is that what they were, the name they were attaching to it? So that'll be a great experiment to see how that one works out, if it works out, because as I'm reading here, Maine voters also using the referendum process voted to raise the minimum wage in their state. However, Paul LePage, you might have guessed, hates that idea. He's opposed to raising the minimum wage and is now moving to block it. You would think that would be a difficult thing to do. Everybody gets to vote, referendum, boom, it's done, right? Not in Donald Trump or Paul LePage's world. So once again, I think a good preview of what you might expect on similar fronts from somebody like Donald Trump. The 2016 ballot measure raising Maine's minimum wage to $12 by 2020 got far more votes, by the way, than Governor Paul LePage did when he last ran in 2014. There were 417,132 votes in favor of the referendum. Paul LePage only netted 294,533 votes to make him governor. But what the hell? Anyway, thanks for those stats to Laura Clausen, whose piece we're reading here. Anyway, according to LePage, though, Maine voters just didn't know what they were doing when they passed the minimum wage increase, and they need him to protect them from their own actions by blocking it. In a letter to incoming lawmakers and released publicly yesterday, so I guess would have been yesterday, so Monday, let's say, Maine Governor Paul LePage railed against the recently passed minimum wage increase referendum and said he would back legislation to halt the raises. Falsely claiming that the measure will harm Maine's elderly, LePage wrote that Mainers did not understand the specifics of the referendum they approved when voting in favor of Question 4. LePage says he intends to delay the implementation of the minimum wage increases, cancel future raises based on the cost of living, and strip away base wage increases for workers like restaurant servers who also receive tips. The good news is Democrats control the Maine State House, I guess. So there will be a barrier to LePage overturning the will of his state's voters. So I guess we can depend on that one. But just interesting to note that if you're looking for a preview, LePage is certainly it. There's something as unambiguous as a referendum, and he says, you probably didn't know what you were talking about. And so I'm going to find ways, some of which I'm going to invent, to just block this from happening. And people are going to sit there and say, how do we even combat this? Do we have to wait for another referendum to come around to say, no, we really did mean it? Or what? It's unclear. And that's one of the difficulties of governing by referendum if you just have a reality denialist in office, I guess. Maybe we need to let go of reality after all. Bill has this reaction. Not the first time LePage has blocked citizen-approved referendum mandates. He's done it several times. Okay, so then you're used to it, which is, I guess, gives me this pause. Like, at the end of Laura's piece here. She says, the good news is Democrats control the Maine State House, so there will be a barrier to Page overturning the will of his state's voters. How have they done as barrier to LePage overturning the will of the state's voters in the past? Maybe they've done great with it. But at this point, if you're not impeaching this dude, I really don't know what to tell you. Is it still worth trying to work with him? I guess if they've managed to just say, shut the hell up, LePage, and undo what he tries to undo, and they've done it successfully, and it's smooth now, and it's down to a science with them, I guess they could say, we can continue to let this guy fulminate in office and then just undo his damage, and soon we'll be rid of him. But if they've had even one instance of failing to block his ability to overturn these referenda, I would just say, look, if you control the Maine State House, then do something with it. Get rid of this lunatic and put somebody in office that understands the dynamics of constitutional government. What are you waiting for? So I don't know. I mean, maybe I'll get word that they've been doing great, which would be wonderful. Let me know about it. The problem is, of course, we have no such backstop in the United States and the federal government. So that's kind of troubling. All right. So let's get down to it. Let's see. Are there any other items that we need to share with one another? Well, there are certainly a few. Oh, yes. Well, I guess I owe you this one. And we'll still try and reserve a block of time for our contributors to chime in. One more piece from that crazy Daily Kos blog. This one from Mark Sumner. Since I made mention of it earlier, entitled, Trump may love his D.C. hotel, but he can't keep it. You'll recall the weird dynamic that we have in place with Trump being both landlord and tenant now, essentially, when he gets sworn in anyway, of the D.C. old post office building where his new hotel is. And, that's at the center of this piece here. Argentina, Georgia, India, Philippines, UK. Every day seems to turn up another country in which Trump has a conflict of interest, and we are only seeing the tip of the iceberg. But you don't have to travel overseas to find a fat conflict of interest for the president-elect. You only have to travel a few blocks from the White House. And this, an excerpt from reporting in mygovexec.com. They do usually keep a good eye on these things. As the clock ticks down toward President-elect Donald Trump's January 20th inauguration, the window is rapidly closing on the General Services Administration's opportunity to extricate itself from the Trump Organization's lease of the historic Post Office Pavilion. Yeah, that's still an option that's open to them. The lease, in which Donald Trump would, in effect, be both landlord and tenant, now presents unprecedented and intolerable conflicts of interest. And as it turns out, they really have a rather sturdy leg to stand on here in this one. Back to Mark here. Trump has already arranged special visits for foreign diplomats to the Trump International Hotel, making it clear that he intends to leverage the site. You'll recall they had the big party for the diplomatic community. By the way, also breaking into the news today, maybe note to self to find a reference for this one, but you've probably heard the news already, that the Bahraini diplomatic corps has already arranged for the rental of the D.C. International Hotel, the Trump International Hotel, to celebrate its National Day here in the United States. Why are they celebrating their National Day here in the United States? Well, as Bahrainis abroad, that is their right, of course, and they may want to make a big party out of it. Just interesting that they've never really had an opportunity before to make a big party of it in a way that would specifically enrich the president himself. They could put on a big party and invite him to be there and enjoy a fabulous lifestyle for an hour or two. We tolerate that. But the idea of President Trump getting thousands of dollars into his pocket directly because the Bahrainis put it there because they had their party, I think you all understand that new dynamic. But anyway, I'll dig up a link for you on the Bahraini thing if you haven't seen it yet. So, In addition to that, and of course, courting the entire diplomatic community to do the same, we see this. Visitors to the Trump White House would be well advised, Mark writes, to produce proof of where they're staying. Rents can validate their parking. But there's a minor detail, and this, of course, is the heart of everything, and it's a rather major detail. Back to the government execs here. In writing the contract, the federal and D.C. governments determined in advance, so this was some time ago, that elected officials could play no role in this lease arrangement. And I would speculate that this is probably something that's fairly standard for government contracting of this type. The contract language is clear. No, and admittedly here's some ellipses, no elected official of the government of the United States, ellipses, shall be admitted to any share or part of this lease or to any benefit that may arise therefrom. Pretty standard, I would think. Basically, the government, the General Services Administration saying, look, we'll lease this building and any other that's available for such an arrangement to any private interest that want, and we'll make a public-private partnership out of this. What we won't do, what we can't do, what we should not allow anyone else to do is to give an inside track on these lucrative leases to government employees, even if they're just, regular folks making their way and they do their day job just fine and can separate their side business fine from their day job, and let's say their side business, they work in a Department of Agriculture as their day job, and their side business is investing in real estate. It's a no-go with the General Services Administration to be seen leasing on any terms, because, of course, people would become suspicious that they were favorable, even if it was provable that they were not. They just don't want the appearance of impropriety. Remember that standard? They don't want to be seen at the GSA as possibly having favored someone's bid for the lease because they happen to be a government employee, even if they were just some mid-level person at the Department of Agriculture who somehow managed to put together the financing to lease it. So it's a standard thing. We don't do business with people that would make it look like we might be, granting favors to or treating with some favoritism. So that's the deal. Of course, by most definitions, the President of the United States would probably be considered an elected official of the government of the United States. But hey, you never know what kind of language his lawyers are going to come up with, right? So, Mark notes, that gives Donald Trump until January 20th to get out, or the GSA will have to evict the president. While most conflict of interest laws exempt the president, the lease clause for the Trump International Hotel at the old post office does not. By any interpretation of the law, we'll see, come January 20th, Trump will be an elected official and therefore in breach of contract. He can't lease the hotel space. His company can't lease the hotel space. No entity with which he has financial connection can lease the hotel space. Trump has to go. Back to our outside source here. The lease's language is not meaningless boilerplate. The clause is consistent with long-standing prohibitions on entering into contracts with federal employees. The prohibition extends to any business concern or other organization owned or substantially owned or controlled by one or more government employees of any type, especially the president. This policy is intended to avoid any conflict of interest that might arise between the employees' interests and their government duties, and to avoid the appearance of favoritism or preferential treatment by the government toward its employees. If he fails to hand over the keys, not only will Trump be in breach of the contract, he'll also be involved in a massive conflict of interest. No kidding. He'll be appointing the new head of the GSA who will be in charge of the people who are supposed to enforce the contract. Back to our outside source, the GSA employees handling the Trump lease will be caught between their duty to protect the interests of the building's landlord, that is the government, the public, and the taxpayers, and their duty of loyalty to the GSA administrator, who will be appointed by and serve at the pleasure of then President Trump. But since Trump will control the GSA and Republicans will control Congress, don't expect anyone to be in a hurry to do anything about it. In fact, the whole conflict of interest thing isn't going to exactly be at the center of Congress's radar. And here a quote from a Huffington Post piece on the subject. House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Republican of California, did have some advice for Democrats, telling reporters they should back off calls for Congress to investigate how Trump and his transition team are separating the president-elect's business interests from the demands of the nation. Don't ask. Back off. When asked whether it is actually Congress's responsibility to ensure the executive is following the rules, McCarthy countered with a question of his own about whether Trump really is breaking the rules. I think the Constitution is an issue, he said. Thanks for granting that one. But are you telling me there's something that meets the criteria currently in the actions of what he's doing? Well, Mark answers the question. Sure. Trump is only extorting foreign leaders to help his business partners and hustle along deals. And not only does every diplomat staying at the post office mean another potential breach of the emoluments clause, but just running the place puts Trump in clear violation of a federal contract. Nothing to see here. And back to my government exec, the government should immediately end the hotel lease relationship before Trump becomes president. In a perfect world, Trump and the GSA would negotiate a mutually agreeable termination of the lease or a novation or transfer to an unrelated firm. Nothing thus far suggests that President-elect Trump appreciates the need to do so, and as a result, GSA must take unilateral action. Yep, that's basically it. By the way, another piece which I'll forego at the moment in the interest of getting to some of our other contributors, another piece by Mark, as it happens. He mentioned in the previous piece, Congress appears to have no real interest in straightening this out, right? A related piece entitled, you should take a look at, Jason Chaffetz, remember him? Now sitting as chairman of the Government Oversight Committee in the House. Jason Chaffetz mysteriously loses his interest in investigations. You may recall that during the campaign, when everybody believed that Hillary Clinton was going to win, he couldn't stop talking about his plans for 2017 and what the committee would be investigating. And they would be looking, of course, over Hillary Clinton's record, both with her emails, of course, because why not? Everybody has to say the word emails anytime you say Hillary Clinton, and anything else to see if they could come up with any dangerous conflicts of interest that the public needed to know about. Now, of course, that we find out that the president will be Donald Trump, you might say, oh, well, he never really meant that he would be investigating Donald Trump, surely, right? And he did, however, during the campaign say that his committee would investigate even President-elect Trump, should he win, with equal fervor. In other words, that his fervor for investigation was not partisan. He's not investigating. He wasn't planning to investigate Hillary Clinton simply because he's a Republican and she's a Democrat. Why, I'd do the same to Donald Trump, should he win. Of course, he didn't think he was going to win. And now that he has won, guess what? He, in fact, says, you know what? I probably am not going to investigate that. Thanks for asking, though. And, of course, he and many other members of Congress now saying, by the way, I'm just not going to answer any questions at all about Donald Trump. I'm just not entertaining them anymore. It was John McCain who came up with that particular formulation most recently, though during the campaign, Mitch McConnell simply said that he was going to stop answering questions about Trump too. And it was pretty easy to predict that this would be the operative plan for everyone. Everyone would simply eventually adopt this posture. I simply am not going to answer for Donald Trump. And that was unusual and, more than unusual. I mean, we should formulate it as saying way out of the ordinary, way out of the acceptable range of ordinary for Republicans on the same ticket to say, I'm simply not going to answer for the guy at the top of the ticket. But now he'll be the president. But now I really don't see in this post-fact world why it would change at all. Why Republicans in Congress would simply not continue to say, look, he's the executive, we're from the legislative branch. I don't answer for that guy. I'm not taking any Trump questions. And I assume that they'll all just fall back on the same formulation. And because what's the press going to do about it? They're going to say, I don't know. I don't know how they'll force anyone to answer. They have the ability to shame them for not answering, but then again, and then we're back to the question of, how delegitimized is the press, and does this make any impact with the rest of the world? And we can't be sure, I guess. We'll just have to wait and see. All right. There's much, much more, of course, many more stories that I want to share with you. But some of them don't involve me doing any reading. Rather, they involve having our contributors do the heavy lifting. Let's see. We've got a bunch of things to turn to. Where can we go? Here's something seasonal. We'll start with a seasonal piece from our correspondent in Canada, Brian Monroe, who you can follow as Canuck Pundit on Twitter. A seasonal bit that, you'll get the gist. Let's roll the tape here.
Good morning, David. It is Brian Monroe, your friendly neighborhood Canadian correspondent, with an article based out of Canada here, the Hamilton Spectator. It's written by a woman by the name of Amy Wang. And her article is called Santa Tells a Young Girl That Hillary Clinton Made the Naughty List. And I thought it might be interesting, being that we're around the Christmas holidays. So here's the article. Not even a visit to Santa is apolitical anymore. A man who played Santa Claus at a Florida mall has been removed after reportedly telling a child sitting on his lap that Hillary Clinton was on his naughty list. The incident took place last week at Seminole Town Center in Sanford, Florida, about 25 miles northeast of Orlando. According to the CBS affiliate WKMG, a local woman has taken her two children to the mall to see Santa, a holiday tradition for many families in America. The woman's 4-year-old posed first with St. Nick, and then her 10-year-old daughter sat on the mall Santa's lap, according to WKMG screenshot from one of the woman's Facebook posts. She tells Santa what she wants, and then he tells her she's on the nice list, the Facebook post read. And then he says, and there is only one name on his naughty list. Can you guess who? My daughter says who? And he says, Hillary Clinton, and then started laughing. The woman, who identified herself as a Clinton supporter, wrote that she quickly left with her kids. I'm upset because this had nothing to do with the child and seeing Santa, and at age 10 she still believes, the woman wrote. The news station did not name the woman, but reported that she complained to the Seminole Town Center officials. Those officials told her that the man who played Santa at the mall was an employee of a third-party vendor. According to the woman's Facebook post, the Seminole Town Center manager reached out to her to say that the mall did not condone Santa's behavior. Seminole Town Center representatives did not respond to an interview request Monday, but on Friday, the mall released a statement noting that Santa was employed by an outside company and had since been relocated. The Santa referenced in the recent reports is still employed by the Santa vendor in a different location, the statement read in part. The Santa was given additional training to ensure that he remains in a character of Santa during all future appearances. Santa is a symbol of peace, joy, and goodwill for all, and we are pleased that we are able to bring this cherished symbol to the communities we serve. Colorado-based No Air Programs Corp., which provided the Santa to the Sanford Mall, did not respond to a request for comment. But No Air released a statement Saturday that echoed the mall's statement nearly verbatim. No Air did not name the man who played the controversy-causing Santa. According to its website, No Air Program serves 3.5 million visitors each year in malls across the nation. through its seasonal photo op programs with people who play Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. It provides itself on working year-round to recruit naturally bearded Santas. But a genuine beard is not enough. Santas must have a big heart to match, the website says. Nowhere Santas have big boots to fill. Brian Monroe, reporting, Daily Coast Radio. Back to you, David.
That's a hell of a story, of course. Many of you probably caught wind of that story during the campaign season. I think it does predate the election, but it was pretty amazing. I like that at the end, by the way, that they pride themselves on finding naturally bearded Santas. So it's sort of like a locally sourced artisanal Santa thing. Hipsterism is everywhere, even in Seminole, Florida. But leave it to Florida man Santa to pull that trick. Very interesting, weird, a little bit of a change of pace. Let me let's throw in one more segment here. I've got a piece from John R. in Texas. I've got a couple of them, of course. We're on backlog from a lot of our contributors. But this one, I guess, one of them has since become outdated, though I think it might make good background information at some point for us to note. Just for the record, it had to do with the Trump University fraud case, now settled, but the Texas branch of that, and essentially wherein, was it Greg Abbott, who was then Attorney General at the time? Is that right? Do I have that? I'll check my facts for you, but he, in exchange, well, of course, he's never admitted it, but basically he had the Pam Bondi situation going on there. Do I have something in this hand that if I put it in your hand could make this whole Trump University thing go away? And he actually netted $10,000 more than Bondi. But on the other hand, Bondi ended up on his transition executive committee, and I guess Abbott never got quite that far. But so that I guess is a little bit has been outpaced by events now that there is a settlement in the offing. Although, once again, I guess you want to keep your eye on something. I am not certain I could tell you whether or not Donald Trump has made any payments on that settlement. That's still an open question. And, it was Greg Abbott, by the way. Just by way of fact-checking on that one, but we'll check in on that one day later on when this becomes a bigger problem. I can't tell you whether or not the terms of the settlement have required any immediate payment or the deposit of any funds in any escrow accounts or anything like that. My guess is that they don't, that the settlement was reached with a promise to pay, and now I wonder whether they might not just try and delay payment, or at least part of the payment, until after Trump is sworn in as president. And then it might, you know how inventive his lawyers are. I guess they're inventive enough to say, if we can delay payment until after January 20th, then the next time that the courts seek to enforce payment based on the existing settlement agreement, we might just delay more, or we might actually succeed in arguing, no, I'm sorry, Article 3 courts, or I don't know whether it was, I guess in this case, a state court, has not got jurisdiction to order the President of the United States to do anything in particular, and you'll either simply have to wait until he's no longer President of the United States, forego payment, or accept something considerably less, in which case the President would be willing to satisfy you in his private capacity, but rather than $25 million, let's say $25, period. Might be as high as we're willing to go. I don't know that they plan to do this. I only know that it's an unusual situation. I don't know if a president-elect has ever before entered office under court order to make cash payments to anyone, and whether or not a president has succeeded in leveraging his unique position as president to forestall the orders to make those payments. But for all I know, he paid cash the day he wrote the settlement. I am not sure. I haven't checked up, and it's my duty to do so. I'm just putting that out there. In case any of you actually know the answer, please let me know. Just tweet it along to me or write me at kagrox@gmail.com if you prefer, and let me know if you've picked up that particular detail. Let's see. Oh, yes. Okay, so some other comments. Oh, Gideon, I see, has got a question. Do I have time? I don't know. It might not be the easiest thing to fit that in today, but why don't you go ahead and ask me that question, and I'll turn my attention to that housekeeping while I roll John R.'s other piece. We still have, now that the Greg Abbott, former Attorney General of Texas, part of the Texas Roundup is out of the way, we can turn to the problems engulfing the current Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton. Let's roll that one.
Good morning, David. This report is from the Dallas Morning News, dated October 12th. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton headed for felony fraud trial after High Court refuses his last appeal. By Lauren McGowie, Austin Bureau. Note, this story has been updated to include comment from General Paxton's attorneys and analysis from securities experts. Austin. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals on Wednesday refused to take up Ken Paxton's last effort to have his felony indictments thrown out, which means the first-term Republican Attorney General will likely face trial as early as next spring. Today's ruling marks an end to Mr. Paxton's almost year-long attempt to avoid being judged by a jury of his peers. We look forward to going to trial and seeking justice on behalf of the people of Texas, Special Prosecutor Brian Weiss said Wednesday. The Republican-dominated court gave no explanation Wednesday for its decision not to take up Paxton's case. A lower appeals court in Dallas, as well as the Tarrant County judge hearing the case, had already refused to throw out his indictments. But Paxton's attorneys plan to ask the High Court to reconsider its decision in light of the fact that a federal judge recently threw out separate civil charges against their client that are based on the same allegations. We anticipate filing a motion for rehearing the case because we have tremendous confidence in our case. The charges against Ken Paxton are without merit, Paxton attorney Philip Hilder said in a prepared statement. A federal court, following a lower legal standard, ruled that the fraud charges were baseless. Understanding the charges against Paxton. Texas versus Paxton, state criminal case. Current status. Paxton is likely headed to court, but his lawyers are asking the Court of Criminal Appeals one final time to reconsider throwing out his indictments. Charges. 2 first-degree felonies for securities fraud. 1 for failing to register with the state as an investment advisor representative. Allegations. Convinced others to invest in Severgy Inc. without disclosing that he received a commission for doing so. Receiving a commission from people he steered to his investment advisor without registering with the state as the advisor's representative. Paxton is the sole defendant. The state is represented by Special Prosecutors Brian Weiss, Kent Schaefer, and Nicole DeBoard. Possible sentences. 5 to 99 years plus a fine of not more than $10,000 for each first-degree felony charge. 2 to 10 years plus a fine of not more than $10,000 for the third-degree felony charge. U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission versus William E. Mapp III, Warren K. Paxton, Jr. Federal civil case. Current status. Federal judge conditionally threw out the charges on October 7, 2016. The SEC has 14 days to revive the case. Charges. Civil securities fraud. Allegations. Same as in the state criminal case. Paxton and ex-Severgy CEO William E. Mapp III are both defendants. Caleb White, accused of similar allegations as Paxton, and Severgy itself were also defendants, but both settled with the SEC by repaying a combined $260,000 in penalties. Possible consequences. Return of any, quote, ill-gotten gains or unjust enrichment, unquote. Paxton is also accused of failing to register with the state as an investment advisor representative. He was charged with the 2 first-degree felonies and 1 third-degree felony, and he faces a maximum sentence of up to 99 years in prison and tens of thousands of dollars in fines if found guilty. Paxton will be tried in Collin County, where he lives. Since his indictment, Paxton has exhausted every legal remedy at his disposal to fight the charges, which he says are clearly politically motivated. He asked the presiding judge in his case, George Gallagher of Tarrant County, to toss the indictments. Gallagher refused in December. Paxton then appealed his case in a Dallas court, which twice decided not to throw out the charges. The Court of Criminal Appeals represented Paxton's last chance at having the indictments reversed before heading to trial. Civil fraud charges lobbied at Paxton by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission have fared far less well, however. Last week, U.S. District Judge Amos Mazant III threw out the charges, which are based on the same allegations as his criminal indictments, saying the federal government had failed to show Paxton broke disclosure laws when he encouraged people to invest in the tech firm. This case is not about whether Paxton had a moral obligation to disclose his financial arrangements with Severgy to potential investors, Mazant wrote in his ruling. This case is also not about whether Paxton had some general obligation to disclose his financial arrangement to his investor group. Paxton's attorney says the Court of Criminal Appeals should rethink its decision with Mazant's ruling in mind, but Weiss and his fellow special prosecutors say the outcome of the federal civil lawsuit has no bearing on their state criminal case. Experts disagreed whether the initial failure of the federal case, the government has 14 days to revive the charges, could signal a tough road ahead for the state prosecution. John Teakle, a former SEC prosecutor, told the Dallas Morning News last week that if the federal government did not have sufficient evidence in its civil complaint, state prosecutors are, quote, going to have to go back and question whether they can really prove something, unquote. But attorney Jeff Ansley said he did not see any real connection between the cases. There are too many variables, I think, and it makes it impossible to draw any meaningful correlation between the SEC's failure and the failure or success of the state charges, said Ansley, a former enforcement attorney with the SEC who also served as an assistant U.S. attorney. He added that he had little faith that the Criminal Appeals Court would reconsider the decision made Wednesday. In my view, the Attorney General's best chance to avoid trial was by seeking dismissal, which to date has been rejected, Ansley said. Barring a significant change in the position of either side, this case stands a good chance of going to trial.
Rather amazing, and I guess one of the items that we'll need to check up on as John was reading through the helpful bullet points that they provided in the article, kind of giving us the background of where the case then stood. There was, of course, the issue of whether the federal judge conditionally throwing out the charges, the civil case charges, on October 7th, with the SEC having 14 days to revive the case. That date, of course, would have come and gone by now, and I actually don't know. We'll have to follow up one of these days shortly on whether or not the SEC has exercised that option. I think probably it would have crossed the desk at some point had they decided to do so, though I would have thought we would have noticed if they had decided not to as well. But, okay, we were in the crush of election season. And, yeah, this is definitely worth following here, just because it does seem difficult to understand how, it's difficult to understand how, if they thought that there was nothing provable in the civil case with usually the lower standards, the lower threshold of proof, it's difficult to see how they might be able to come up with it and clear that bar in the criminal context. But it's also hard to understand why it is that it's so difficult to prove that Paxton breached some ethical duty to disclose his relationship with the company and the company's representatives, given the facts. I mean, if you're encouraging people to invest in a certain security, and there is in fact a relationship between you and the company issuing the securities, such that you're earning a commission every time you convince someone to invest in it, if that's not disclosed, maybe I'm just not up to date on the latest securities law, and that's certainly a possibility, but that was always portrayed to me as a very clear black and white violation of the requirements. And apparently he's got some argument that says the opposite, and at least this one federal judge in the civil case happen to agree. I'd have to give that some further and closer study, but I want to at least put it on your radar. John correctly believes it belongs there. I agree. I'm happy to pass that story on. And it might otherwise have escaped notice, but for the contributions of our many correspondents from around the country. We still have more to hear from John, more to hear from Brian, in fact, and another Rosalind McGregor piece waiting in the wings, but let's spread it out a little bit. I did field that question from Gideon. I don't know that I have a tremendous amount of my own material to add to it, but he was just basically asking that he sees that Bob Menendez, Democratic senator, of course, from New Jersey, whose name will be much in the news following the death of Fidel Castro, of course, because he is Cuban-American as well. But he's in trouble. What's my reaction? My reaction is twofold. I have no personal attachment to Bob Menendez anymore, and I don't know if I ever did. I worked for him for some time when he was in his first and second terms in the House. That was some years ago. And I would say there's pretty much nothing in the way of any sort of emotional investment or attachment on my part, and certainly not on his, as between the two of us. So, and I don't live in New Jersey anymore, so the reaction is less personal, but I did have I've got more interest in it than your average, I guess, Democratic senator, if there is such a thing. But as it happens, the subject was treated on the front pages of Daily Kos this morning by the Daily Kos Elections Morning Digest, and we might as well refer to that and share that with you. I don't know if Gideon's had a chance to see that one or not, but maybe it's a springboard for some deeper thoughts on what's going on there. He's actually the headline piece on this one in the Morning Digest. New Jersey Democrats stick with Menendez but could go down with the ship. So this is just strictly a strategic electoral look at what's going on. And he leads off the section here. Senator Bob Menendez may be under indictment on multiple counts of corruption, but a spokesperson says he intends to run for re-election, and New Jersey Democrats don't seem to want it any other way. It's a difficult thing to dislodge somebody from that position, especially in New Jersey. The Record canvassed a trio of Congress members, all of whom are sticking with the incumbent, and who might otherwise perhaps be considered possible replacements, is the implication. Bill Pascrell, who says, I don't see any slippage at all. That is to say, no window for him to slip in and say, well, we're looking at him falling in the polls. Why don't we right the ship and save ourselves by nominating, let's say, me? Also comment from Bonnie Watson Coleman. He's still a strong leader. And Donald Norcross, who says he's doing an excellent job. The head of the State Sierra Club is also on Team Menendez. But while New Jersey politicians are known for displaying loyalty in the face of corruption, it could come at a price. Menendez has spent the last year and a half appealing his indictment with little success, and he faces a trial date in September of next year. If he's found guilty, Democrats would have to scramble to find a mid-campaign replacement, and even if he's not, he could wind up even more damaged than he already is. Luckily for Menendez, though, Republicans haven't so far shown much interest in tackling him. The Record mentions wealthy GOP Representative Tom MacArthur as a possibility, but he hasn't said anything, nor has anyone else. However, Republicans and even some Democrats may be waiting until next year's gubernatorial race plays out before making any moves on the Senate side. Menendez also benefits from the fact that New Jersey hasn't elected a Republican to the Senate since 1972, and the NRSC will be preoccupied with many other races in 2018. That's true. But Garden State Democrats nearly fumbled a race in 2002 when another senator with a reputation for shabby ethics, Bob Torricelli, nearly took the party down with him until he agreed to step aside for former Senator Frank Laudenberg at the last minute. Laudenberg, of course, not available for that role this time. Ironically, or perhaps perfectly for Jersey, the only person who's actually even hinted that he might run against Menendez is, you'll never guess it unless you remember that we're talking about New Jersey, Torricelli himself. Wow. Well, that would be something. By the way, for those of you wondering, and I'm still, still out of the loop in terms of what exactly, where we stand in terms of the current issues before us with Menendez. The link involved in the piece, or included in the piece, is to Paul Kane's piece of April of last year in the Washington Post. Senator Robert Menendez indicted on corruption charges. We did discuss them when they first came out, and in case you don't recall, now it refreshes my memory. The charges involved, as I said here, the use of influence of his office to advance the business interests of a longtime friend and political supporter in exchange for luxury gifts, lavish vacations, and more than $750,000 in campaign donations. We're talking here about his friend Salomon Melgen, a Florida-based eye doctor with whom Menendez has maintained a long personal and political friendship. Menendez intervened on Melgen's behalf in at least 2 disputes, one with federal regulators over Medicare charges, and the other involving a bid by Melgen to secure a port security contract in the Dominican Republic, according to the indictment. Prosecutors then said that over a 7-year period, Menendez relied on Melgen for free private jet flights to weekend getaways at resorts in Florida, the Dominican Republic, and Paris. So that'll probably refresh your memory about those things. And my recollection of the case that the government was putting together at the time was that it didn't really do enough to cross that line of the gray area to demonstrate that the friendship wasn't of long-standing and a otherwise genuine nature, which is going to be problematic. What will be really interesting to see, and it may end up being in addition to the strategic value of delaying the trial for as long as possible, it might delay it to the point where we're entertaining or undertaking this trial under the Trump administration. It will be really interesting, to say the very least, to see what federal courts make of the idea that someone would intervene on behalf of a, let's say, we'll, for the sake of argument, call him a favored contributor at this point to his reelection campaign, a doctor looking for help in a ongoing dispute with federal regulators over Medicare charges, given that at the time the Trump administration's Secretary of Health and Human Services will likely be hard at work at dismantling some of the very same federal regulations, possibly the same ones at issue here, and doing so in general, as opposed to in one specific. And I guess you can separate things that way and say, well, if you're looking to make a fix for one particular person, that's a different thing than freeing all doctors from that regulation. But it will, and I guess it should impact the question of how should we view this activity, given that the current administration may well be looking to dismantle the same regulations, in addition to which, and not coincidentally, we'll also be looking at a situation in which the government or a government official is seeking to intervene in the awarding of government contracts to benefit favored contributors, because this also will be a current issue under the Trump administration. And in fact, if we're forced to stand by and watch no one raise so much as a word of objection on the majority side in Congress to the president himself involving himself in these arrangements, and possibly even involving himself in these arrangements to his own benefit. In other words, not intervening with the government to make sure that a favored contributor gets a government contract, but intervening with the government to make sure that he and his family get a favored contract. It's going to be awfully difficult to stomach watching that be excused while senators from the other political party are on trial for the old school violation of helping somebody else get a government contract. But yes, it's not supposed to be done by either party or by either official, and it may just be one of those cases where, lower down the totem pole, you get hung out to dry and the guy sitting at the top gets to skate, or at least for a while. And it may yet come to pass that Donald Trump is asked to answer for the same situation. It's just not happening now. And the fact that, person B isn't currently on trial for doing what person A is on trial for doing earlier in time isn't necessarily any kind of an excuse when it comes to person A. So we'll have to wait and see what kind of case the government is able to put together. Politically speaking, it doesn't look like it's going to make much change, and I don't doubt that they'll stick with the same strategy because it's gotten Menendez through more than one election in the past. But yeah, good question. Definitely a situation that we'll need to keep an eye on. But you know what? I have little to no personal interest anymore in what happens to Menendez with this stuff. I mean, I can't. It's just not. I just don't have that kind of connection with him. So, I have no particular insight into it. I do think it will make for an interesting story and an interesting contrast with the things that we suspect the president-elect and later the president will be involving himself in. So Gideon says, yeah, he saw the Daily Kos story, so I did him no favors by reading that one. But perhaps the rest of you enjoyed knowing what was going on politically. That's at least half the story in terms of what do we think he's going to do, what will be his strategy, and what will be the strategy of New Jersey Democrats with respect to the fact that they might have to face an election with an ethical cloud or, in fact, an indictment cloud hanging over one of their candidates. Likely nothing. They may, in fact, hang on and say, let the judgment be made and let the voters speak. And you know what? That'll be, in addition to what I just outlined for you, that'll be uniquely interesting to see how you justify saying, okay, he's had his accountability moment. And the people of New Jersey say they have no problem with it. We may be witnessing exactly the same thing in reverse with respect to Donald Trump. What a frustrating place to live. But hey, everything's got nuance. Everything's got twists and turns and unexpected relationships being revealed behind the scenes. That's something I'd like to cover tomorrow with a piece from Huffington Post that focuses on the sausage-making process of legislation in Congress, a fantastic opportunity to discuss the finer points of how that stuff is done and how you can't always necessarily put a finger with absolute certainty on who's doing right and who's not. We'll follow up with that one tomorrow. Of course, in the meantime, do stay tuned for the after show coming up right after this program, chock full, as usual, of amazing stories, many of which we will have missed in our broadcast. I'll try and squeeze a few of those in after this.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Wow, all kinds of stuff today. I don't know how I can distinguish between what is the most important of all these things, but plenty to do with President Trump and hearkening back to the days of Nixon. Breitbart in trouble with losing advertisers. And on the last half, a report on the only black girl attending an Oregon City high school finding racist messages. Dang. Stay tuned.